Good evening. I would like to call the City of Mount Vernon City Council meeting for Wednesday, May 28th, 2025 to order. The time is now 7:03 p.m. Would you please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would like to ask the clerk to please call the roll call of council members.
Councilmember Vanderstoop,
Present.
Councilmember Beaton,
Here.
Councilmember Brocksmith,
Here.
Councilmember Correas,
Here.
Councilmember Hudson,
Here.
Councilmember Tesoro,
Here.
Councilmember Molinar.
Here. Becky, council, we have one change to, at least, no, I think we've got a couple changes to tonight's agenda prior to approval. One would be to strike item 6A. There's no PUD presentation tonight. And one would be the city attorney has an ordinance to present to us at the end of the agenda. But with those two changes, I would entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Gary and a second by Mary to approve the agenda as amended. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion passes. And item 3 is community comments. Is there anyone here from the public tonight who would like to address City Council? All right, seeing none, we will move on. Tonight's consent agenda includes minutes, payroll, checks, wire transfers, claims, and an agreement. Council, would you like to make a motion for the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
A clarified motion by Melissa and a second by Andrew. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion passes. We'll go to committee reports. Item 5A, council held its monthly finance meeting tonight at 6 p.m. in council chambers, and Councilmember Molinar chaired that committee and has a report for us. Gary.
Okay, we opened up the meeting at 6:02 tonight, after the approval of the April 23rd minutes. Doug, our finance director, talked about UKG payroll software. Apparently it's kind of outdated and we're having problems. It puts the city a little bit at risk with the amount of manual operations that are involved, and it's not really compatible with our fire and police operating systems. So we're updating to UKG Pro, which will be aligning with city operational requirements in perfect cohesion. Next, he talked about the reclassification in our salary schedule. We're going to have a records specialist reclassified as an evidence technician. This will, because of that, we will be saving probably about $15,000 a year on that. And then also a senior accounting specialist classification will also be reclassified. We are looking at a quite a bit deficit in our budget this year, so we're looking into a parks and public safety levy lift. The levy, we're just kind of working through some of the steps in this, and nothing has been decided on it as of yet, but we're looking into that as possibly funding some of the trails equipment, ball fields, and then on the public safety side, it would be to hire 3 more firemen and also 3 police officers. Others that we discussed but didn't make move on was also doing a city B&O tax. And then Doug talked about House Bill 2015, which would help with public safety and be spent on criminal justice only. And then he gave us a graph on our sales taxes, which was up in April, which is good news. And we're about 18,000 down from where we were last year at this time. And we closed the meeting at 7:58 or 6:58.
Thanks, Gary. Next up is the report on last Wednesday's Development Services Committee, and Council Member Melissa Beaton chairs that and has the report. Melissa.
Thank you, Mayor. As the mayor mentioned, maybe you didn't mention, we met last Wednesday night here in council chambers, and we jumped right into a discussion about accessory dwelling units and pre-approved building plans. It's a new approach that's being adopted in other municipalities to speed up the building permit review and enables the applicant to select from a pre-approved set of plans. City would still be required to do the land use reviews, and municipal code will need to be updated to adopt the process. We also discussed parking, setbacks, and lot requirements. We then jumped into an update on our comprehensive plan. We received a review from the Joint Citizen Advisory Committee / Planning Commission meeting. Director Pratchner summarized discussions that occurred about the framework, population, housing, and job growth targets. The public participation plan was also reviewed. There will be a QR code that will be available for residents to participate in an upcoming survey. The committee also briefly discussed a vision statement, and more information will be coming out on that. They then discussed strategies for policy, goals, and objectives versus policies, goals, and implementations, and then also municipal code updates. We were then provided with the next steps and scheduled meetings. We were also just provided with an overall timeline update on the comp plan timeline. Then we moved into agenda requests, which include rezoning steps and parking requirements for retail property. Under miscellaneous, Mayor Donovan provided information about an amendment to the recently approved public defense contract that appears on tonight's consent agenda that just appeared, which we just approved, and also information about an amendment to the recently approved agreement that we had with Skagit County for iOS funding. And then we also received a reminder that council, mayor, and the county commissioners met this evening at 5 p.m. here in the police court campus to discuss the county's senior center, which is located next to Sherman Anderson. And then we were also reminded that WashDOT will be updating council and mayor in June. And I made the request that the update take place at a regular council meeting so that it is recorded and the public can listen to their presentation. And with that, we adjourned at 7:16.
Thank you, Melissa. And also so the public can come and give public comment. Maybe WashDOT would hear those comments concerning both State Highway 536 and State Highway 538, so Memorial Highway and College Way. Item 5B are council member comments. Are there any council member comments? Yes, council member Craig.
I do have one. And my comment today is just to say we do not do things alone. And because of the community support and our Kiwanis members is why we do our salmon barbecue, and we were able to raise enough funds this year to award students, mostly migrant students. And those great students, they do work hard at this Mount Vernon High School and another schools. And because of the funds we raise, we were able to have enough funds for 13 or 14 scholarships. We are going to be awarding them next week. And thank you for the whole community just to support us in this great event we do every year. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council member comment? All right. For mayor's report tonight, I would direct our listeners to the city's YouTube channel. Did you know the city of Mount Vernon has a YouTube channel? You may be watching this meeting on that YouTube channel, so you know. But if you're not, check out the city's YouTube channel. All sorts of videos there for city business. But today, I gave the State of the City address for 2025 at the Chamber of Commerce board meeting, and that will be on the city's YouTube channel. I feel like I could give that presentation again, but I thought I would save the public and mostly city council the 45 minutes of listening to me blather on. So we're going to defer to the YouTube channel for the State of the City address and move on from the mayor's report. So that is your mayor's report for May 28th, 2025. And we move on to new business. Under new business, item A was removed from the agenda tonight. We hope PUD General Manager George Sadu is feeling better soon. Item B is the approval of an agreement with Pacific Surveying and Engineering, and Public Works Director Chris Phillips is here for that item. Chris.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council. One statement here is that Phillips forgot his reading glasses. So I'm going to do my best
This will be fun.
to try to see something in here, but it's really just a bunch of blurb. City staff, and oh, thank you, boss. Hey, there we go. City staff recommends City Council authorize the mayor to enter into an agreement with Pacific Survey and Engineering to complete South Mount Vernon boundary line, parcel clarification, stormwater and wastewater utility layers, which builds on the Skagit County South Mount Vernon Monument Project that occurred a few years ago, in the amount not to exceed $80,000 plus tax. This is a collaborative effort between Development Services and your utilities. Development Services will be already budgeted $20,000 in this year's budget. Wastewater and surface water will be contributing $30,000 apiece. Basically, what's happening is when you get city center down to Blackburn, you're plus or minus 80 feet for lot lines. I mean, you know, it's not even a hand grenade. You are literally just there. And trying to locate things when it comes to the utilities is very difficult. So that really, in essence, is what this project's for. In the map that you can see there, it's a significant amount of Mount Vernon, all of West Mount Vernon, South Mount Vernon, all the way over to 15th Street. So the idea is really to take this patchwork mosaic of GIS that's been accumulated over the last 2 decades and putting it into one cogent form. And that's what we're looking to do. So with that, again, city staff recommends that City Council authorize the mayor to enter into the agreement with Pacific Survey and Engineering, pending your questions.
Council questions for Chris? Any motions?
I'll move that we authorize the mayor to enter into agreement with Pacific Survey and Engineering.
Second?
Motion by Mary and a second by Melissa. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion passes. All right, we are on to item C. Item C is the approval of an agreement with David Evans and Associates, and Public Works Capital Projects Manager Frank Reiner will present this item. Hello, Frank.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Council, for your time tonight. What I bring for you tonight is a recommendation to authorize the mayor to execute a contract amendment with David Evans and Associates for additional engineering design services supporting the final design for the Carpenter Creek Hickox Road Fish Passage Improvements Project. So this is the third amendment that I've brought to you, and there's a reason for that. And that is I'm keeping a very careful track on the complexities of the scoping design at this point in time in the 30% or in the 60% design. We have a ravine that the stream runs through. We have a roadway, which happens to also be the only roadway in and out of the quarry. And we have the culvert itself is a fairly easy thing to drop in there. The excavation now we're looking at to try and make that more manageable. So what I have been doing is I have been authorizing David Evans to do a little bit of evaluation work to draw some conclusions about that. But now this next step is to look at the constructability of the 60% design. And in particular, something that I mentioned to you in committee when I appeared before you before, which is the temporary shoring associated with the design. In order to put the culvert in, we have to open up a fairly significant excavation on either side of the actual culvert itself because the roadway elevation is a little over 10 feet above the top of the culvert where the actual roadway alignment is. In order to do that, we have to do it one of two ways. We either have to slope back the excavation, which then requires more fill to come back in and backfill that, which also requires more construction time, or we have to put in a temporary shoring system that allows the excavation to stand more vertical. The complexity that we identified fairly recently, as in the last month, is that on the northwest side of the ravine where we have that, this is the hill slope that basically just up the hill is the archery range facility. And so northwest of the project, we will be excavating right at the toe of that slope in order to put in this culvert. And the designer put in a temporary shoring wall, and I took one look at it and went, how expensive is this going to be when you're talking about a temporary shoring wall that not only has to support the normal earth load that you normally have to support to keep the excavation safe, but also this back slope that we're talking about here. And so with that, I sat down with David Evans and with the geotech engineer, HWA, and we started scoping out a analysis to now take another look at that. First of all, define for us what that cost is going to be. And second of all, start to articulate other options if that cost is as significant as I anticipate it being. With steel prices being what they are today, putting a lot of sacrificial soldier pile steel in the ground just to keep an excavation open is what I would consider a cost prohibitive constructability option. So I'm coming to you today to authorize some expenditure that I've already done, but also some expenditure that I have not yet done because I want to make sure that I am proactively coming to you to authorize scope changes rather than come to you after the fact and say, so here's the actual total bill. Also, the nature of this amendment that I bring to you tonight is to extend the David Evans project management costs, which actually came to an end this year, to the end of next year. And that is as part of the earlier amendment where I asked you to approve the time extension for the contract. The time extension goes through the end of 2026. I still don't think that the contract is actually going to actually require that. So I'm only coming to you tonight to ask for the additional funding necessary for David Evans project management through the end of 2025. And with that, do you have any questions for me?
Questions for Frank? Motion to let Frank fix this thing.
I would make a motion to let Frank fix this thing, but your presentation was very interesting about the shoring up and the toe of I can kind of visualize it because I'm driving up the road visualizing it. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Second.
Motion by Mary and a second by Idis. Any discussion on this? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion passes.
So I do anticipate bringing you at least one more report out on the outcome of the 60% analysis that I'm authorizing David Evans to do, especially if in doing that we discover that we do need to change direction before we get too much further into design, and what that direction might be and what the additional cost might be associated with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Don't go far.
I'm not planning on.
Item D is not an action item, but it is the review of 2026-2031 Transportation Improvement Plan. Frank.
So I promise you first and foremost that this is just going to be a review because you've heard a lot from me already on this subject. However, I haven't presented this in regular council meeting before. So I am going to, with your permission, first of all, just review some of the basics that I presented to you early this year as far as what the 6-year tip that we're currently reviewing is. And then I want to be able to open it up to any questions or comments or feedback that you might have had on the drafts that you received here about a week and a half ago. So just in general, the tip is required by state RCW for all public agencies that maintain a public transportation system. It's a city-specific work plan. It's a 6-year work plan. It includes individual projects, significant transportation engineering studies, and any transportation-oriented annual programs, particularly those that involve the construction or the delivery of capital assets for our transportation system. It's a 6-year planning window. It always starts with the year after the city adopts it. So currently we're working under the 25-2030 tip that you adopted last year. We have a deadline to adopt it by July 1, and I've appreciated your ability to stay with me and support me in reaching that objective this year. We ran a little late in the past, so I wanted to try and hit the mark this time around. Year one of the TIP is then used. In fact, it is being used right now to develop the CIP and the budget for later this year. And then finally, the TIP is usually revised once a year, right at the beginning of the year, but it can be amended at any time during the year before another regular annual update in order to respond to changing or emergent needs or opportunities that might arise. Project deliveries on the TIP are usually represented in terms of phase because very often, for one reason or another, either time or money, we can't always deliver the full measure of both the design and the construction project within the 6-year window. Consequently, any phases that fall outside the window end up being unprogrammed, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. The typical project phases that I use for transportation projects include planning, pre-design. So this includes things like corridor studies, like what we're doing for the Blackburn Road extension. Then design preliminary engineering. I put the preliminary engineering phrase in there because that's the federal terminology for what is essentially the design stage of a project. Design can include right away, assuming those expenses are locally funded and not funded by an external grant source. We may have a phase, it's rare, and I kind of want to keep it that way, that is called right-of-way acquisition if we have external fundings, especially federal funding, that is purchasing right-of-way for a transportation project. We do have to have a separate stage for that because there's a whole separate process that goes with that. And then finally, construction. I note it together with construction, but one of the things that I often want to remind people is that in a lot of projects, especially if there's environmental impacts, we sometimes have a post-construction stage to the project where we are doing things, for instance, like monitoring and maintenance of permit responsibilities that we may take on as the result of a project. It doesn't happen with every project, but it does happen with some of them. The timing of project delivery, individual project delivery, is usually dependent on a few different factors that we look at when we put together the TIP. The immediacy of need is obviously of primary importance. The funding availability and the funding strategy plan is usually right up there with that in terms of primacy. Staff and resource availability. We can program a lot of projects, but at the end of the day, it's what do we have the capacity to be able to properly manage and keep up with. And then finally, a lot of times transportation projects have prerequisites or dependencies. So for instance, before we do a major transportation project, we want to make sure that we've done all the utility work improvement work that we might want to do so that we're not going back and ripping up a investment that we put in there. The TIP is a fiscally constrained document. Some of our TIPs in past years have not been so. I tried to bring this one back into alignment with the state requirement for a fiscally constrained document. The guidelines behind that are somewhat subjective. I've generally tried to actually conform to the same practices that SCOG uses for their regional transportation improvement program just for compatibility. So the timing is usually year one of a project. The funding is secured. It's not necessarily approved because obviously the budget hasn't come before you yet for your approval, but we know how we're going to pay for the year one work. Similarly, year two and year three, typically there's an idea that we know how we're going to pay with it. And if there's external funding in the year two, year three, it's funding that we've already been awarded and secured. So we're not trying to plan a transportation project, if you'll forgive the reference, with monopoly money here. Year 4 and year 6, that's where we get into the more realistic funding strategies. So sometimes we haven't applied for a grant yet, but I want to tee up a project to be ready to go if we can secure grants. So very often in years 4 to 6, you will find in the TIP where I put in place the match funds that I anticipate, the local match funds that I anticipate for a project, with the anticipation that I'm going to chase external funding in that period of time. If we don't secure that external funding, then in a future TIP revision, then we revisit that. And that should be noted in general that everything that we adopt in the TIP is subject to review, revision, and changes every year so that we can keep this thing fresh and keep it functional and not just have projects kind of age on the TIP indefinitely. Finally, this year I implemented basically an unprogrammed table. This funding strategy isn't available, or the project requires more than 6 years for some or all the project phases. I want people to be able to know that the project is there, it's been considered, it's part of our long-range transportation plans. It just doesn't fit into the 6-year window. So that is something that you find in the TIP draft this year. Finally, the unprogrammed projects. I kind of topped up on this already. Some of these projects also have triggers that haven't yet triggered, especially concurrency triggers. I'm not going to build a signalized intersection until concurrency tells me I need to build a signalized intersection. There may be limits on city resources for delivery. There is, again, a point in time where we reach a point where we've maxed out at least our current staff resources to deliver projects over that 6-year period. One of the changes that can happen over time, it's not going to happen in the near future, but can happen over time, is that if we grow, that calculation of capacity does change, and the TIP changes accordingly. Finally, we use this tool to keep track of projects in a publicly accessible fashion, so that not only projects that come from you or the mayor have a chance to stay visible, but also so the public can keep an eye on what is in that bigger transportation improvement plan and ask questions related to that. A lot of times I will get questions. Why is this project unprogrammed and this project programmed? That's part of why I have this, is so that that conversation can happen. And then finally, my intent is, as always, to, and will with the new comprehensive plan when you adopt it a little later on, is to sustain this unprogrammed project approach as a bridge between the 6-year TIP and the 20-year comprehensive plan, especially as it pertains to transportation. And so we're almost at the end of the process, and I'll almost stop talking about the TIP for 6 months. And so what I asked you at the committee meeting to approve advertising a public hearing for June 11th. The first of those advertisements ran in the Skagit Herald today. So the TIP draft documents are currently on the city website. I've made some minor corrections since the draft you received and the draft that is on the website, mostly correcting typos, and in one case correcting a project title that just didn't synchronize up between the various tables and forms, despite my best efforts. But those drafts are available to the public, and then based on comments received on June 11th, my anticipation right now is still to recommend the final adoption of the 2631 TIP at your June 25th meeting. And so with that, I just want to open it up to any comments, questions, or concerns related to the draft TIP that you have for me.
Council, again, no action on this item tonight, but if you have questions or comments, Councilmember Vanderstoep.
Hey, thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic. And the draft is looking incredible. I just want to say I love that the Hogue Road crosswalk improvement and the 10th Street crosswalk improvement are on those. Those are desperately needed, and I'm so happy to see them on there.
And it should be noted that both of those projects came to us through our traffic safety engineering committee program. So both of those came from citizens submitted comments and identifying areas where we had a particular need for pedestrian improvements.
Oh, that's awesome. I many times was in front of the bagel factory and would tell people to call the city about that crosswalk. So hopefully some of those made it in there. Maybe I shouldn't have said that out loud. I was looking at the Broad Street realignment project, and I would consider that one pretty essential. And I was wondering with the TIP if there's any flexibility still in moving projects up or down.
I am, of course, at your disposal as far as that goes. What I will say about that project is it's expensive. And that's the reason why it's currently on the unprogrammed list is, honestly, I've got to find a way to make that project attractive enough for external funding and be able to push it forward that way.
Fair enough.
Because that one is not going to be an easy project to deliver on because of the grade change that we're trying to correct there. It may require extending the existing retaining wall to chase it up the slope and such. So the reason why you don't find it right now on the programmed list is I didn't necessarily have a good option in the current period and in the current funding environment that we're in right now to be able to say that that one's a good one to prioritize ahead of some of the others.
Awesome. I might meet with you offline if that's
Of
okay,
course.
just to go over it a little bit more. And I got one more if I may.
Go ahead.
I was wondering, so the 13th Street Broad Street and the LaVenture signalized light, those two projects, when we're considering concurrency and putting in a signalized light, I have to say for both of these, my personal preference, and I might be alone, would be to have a roundabout or
Agreed.
not to have a signalized light at all. And if you guys don't know which ones, these are in front of the hospital and then just past the new Habitat homes. And these are two places where peak traffic times, maybe you get 4 or 5 cars piling up, something like that. But in particular, the 13th Street signalized stop. Everybody who lives in that neighborhood does not take 13th Street at peak times because they know that you'll get stuck there if you're trying to turn left forever. So every single person who lives in that neighborhood or frequents that area goes to 15th Street. And it would be such a shame for us to put in a signalized light and then to divert all of the traffic that was originally going to 15th Street and waiting their turn to then immediately go to a light on 13th. And so I'm wondering if there's options in there to
There is.
adjust.
So the intersection projects, and this goes for every signalized intersection project that you see on the unprogrammed list right now. And for that matter, it actually goes for the one that's on the programmed list that we can't afford, but I want to at least chase funding for, which is the Riverside Park Place nightmare that currently exists. We haven't necessarily explored in reviewing our past the comprehensive plan and some of the street designs that have gone into it. We haven't really explored in a public forum to the discussion of adopting roundabouts in the city. My experience in other cities, most recently in Lake Stevens, is that can be a bit of a controversial discussion. And that's a hard discussion to have in the context of an individual project. So there's two different answers to this, and one of the answers is my recommendation would be, as we get to the transportation element of the comprehensive plan, and we're talking about the different opportunities for alternatives to, let's say, signalized intersections or even 4-way stop intersections, that we start to talk about, well, can we start to conceptualize as a strategic vision the idea of putting in roundabouts for our collector street intersections in lieu of either that. Right now, the way the comprehensive plan, the 2016 one, is written, it's kind of hardwired that you reach this point of level of service, the action is build a signalized intersection. That's just the way that transportation element is framed out. It is something that I would recommend seeing changed in our current update to kind of keep up with where roundabout design is today. The other answer to your question is, not to put too fine a point on it, signals are expensive. And the budget that you have that's plugged in, the estimate that you have there, will either buy a signalized intersection or it'll buy a roundabout, as a working budget. But yes, as you bring that strategic conversation about that as being an acceptable alternative, going through a public comment process and going through that kind of acceptance process, not necessarily on a project by project basis, so you're not playing whack-a-mole with that. I'm perfectly willing to retask some or all of those projects as potential roundabouts if we have enough space to get an operational roundabout in.
No, that was super useful. Thank you so much.
Good question. Councilmember Beatty.
Thanks, Mayor. Frank, thank you for all of your work that you have put into this. It's pretty impressive, and I know that I can only imagine that it's extremely intense work, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
I do have a question, though. I don't see Urban Avenue on here, specifically from Hogue to College Way, and it's highly used, both traffic and pedestrian. And I know on the east side it's that vacant land, and I'm just assuming that we're waiting for that land to be developed.
So there's actually one, I talked about stuff not making it on there because of prerequisites or dependencies. And that's a good example, actually. In that case, it's a land use planning dependency. My understanding is right now, the zoning of that area is under review and under reconsideration as part of our comprehensive planning process. So I basically kind of held off on making a thought process for that street until I saw which way the zoning went, because depending on how we as a city zone that, if we rezone it, and that's an if statement as much as anything, that then influences how we might treat that street from either a collector standpoint or a street design standpoint. So I knew about Urban Avenue. It was one of those that has never been in the tip. It wasn't identified as a strategic idea. And when it came to me finally in this context that I just described to you, as this would be an ideal transportation project when we decide what we want to do about zoning and or rezoning that area. And so that's why you didn't see it appear here at this point in time.
So I understand that
Yep.
for the east side, but when you flip over to the west sides, behind the grocery store, there is a curb and gutters.
Yep.
And then it stops at Max Dale's, and then it picks back up right at the dog place.
Yeah, and
So there's an
a
entire
gap.
section there where that is also dependent on our,
What I'd
land
like
use-
to put
our
to
study.
you, especially when I'm looking at corridors, even if I'm looking at just non-motorized construction of corridors, is very often I'm looking at both sides of the street at the same time. So the example I give you that's in the tip is Market Street, where I'm looking at it on one side saying, okay, we need bike lanes on this, we need bike lanes on both sides, but I also know that that's in the scope for the potential redevelopment on that side of the street. So very often I'm looking at both sides of the street when I'm thinking about this, because ultimately when I do the project, it's more efficient for us to do a transportation project that improves both sides of the street. Now, if we had no anticipation of the east side of Urban redeveloping anytime soon, either because we don't change the zoning of it or there's a long range idea there, then I might then turn around and look again at the gap that you've described that exists on the west side and say, well, we don't need to wait 10 years just to fix this gap. And so then you would see the project introduced onto the tip. I think I would say that for a lot of projects areas that I've seen in Mount Vernon, where I've seen a gap and gee, it'd be nice to make sure that we have a project to do that. And I'm not going to say that in the future that unprogrammed list isn't going to keep growing as I start to see more and more objectives, especially along our collector corridors. But this one in particular, that's the reason why you didn't see that.
well, fingers crossed that land develops. That's what we're all hoping for.
And like I said, if it doesn't, it's still a need. And I agree that it's a need because it's a gap in our non-motorized network. And as we've looked at more and more at Riverside not being a corridor for bikes, I look to both Urban and then Market on the other side of Urban as being the alternative north-south corridors to Riverside Drive.
Thank you for that.
Got
Yes,
one-
Andrew.
I'm so sorry, I got one more, and I
Of
was
course.
gonna bug the person from PUD, but you're talking about sidewalks, and so I'm gonna bug you for a second. Sorry. PUD comes, they have to replace a pipe, they rip up the sidewalk, they compact gravel over it. Whose responsibility is it to go back and repave that sidewalk?
So all of PUD's work, when they rip something up and replace it, are typically PUD's responsibility to come back and restore the work. And they do that through auspices of permitting from our Development Services Department.
Is there any chance that when somebody asks me, hey, this, just hypothetical here, hey, the sidewalk's been ripped up for like 4 months, when are they gonna come back? Is there a chance that there's some sort of process that we can go through the city and then contact PUD and ask them when they would like to come back? All hypothetical. of course.
Very, and that's a good question. In the spirit of mischief, I put it in the same context as when WashDOT drags their feet on repairing our streets. I think that we can certainly help and facilitate, but we want to make sure that the people that operate in our streets, whether it's utilities, WashDOT cooperating on the state highways, that they are hearing from our public when our public has concerns and issues about that. It may seem like they're being ignored when they do that, but we want to encourage them to do it anyway, because one of the things that we then can come to them and say, hey, we've been hearing a little bit of static, what have you been hearing? And what I get back from them is, oh, we haven't heard any complaints about our work, then our ability to do anything kind of falls flat, because they can just claim that, well, they obviously didn't care enough about it to let us know one way or the other. So I would say that yes, as a secondary, and what I've said in terms of, like, for instance, WashDOT on the state highways is, I have absolutely no problem with us being notified at the same time as people are reaching out to WashDOT directly, just so we know that they're talking. But I would encourage people, if they're concerned about that, to reach out directly to the utility that's doing the work in there, because they need to hear that from us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thanks, for doing the hypothetical on my front yard. And 12th Street. It's been over a year.
Understood.
Yeah.
Other questions? I will join Councilmember Beaton in thanking and acknowledging all the work that you've done for this. I don't think this program existed in Mount Vernon a few years ago, and you've made some huge strides in making this a more accurate and transparent and accessible document for our residents. So thank you, Frank, for that.
Well, this is just the year one of it. I want it to be a sustainable tool as well. So that's the next goal.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Frank.
We are moving on to item E. It's the approval of an agreement with UKG for HR and payroll software, and Finance Director Doug Valesky will present this item. Hello, Doug.
Hello, Mayor. Good evening, council members. So city staff is requesting council to authorize the mayor to enter into an agreement with UKG for the implementation of the UKG Pro payroll and HR human resource information system software. In 2022, the city entered into an agreement with OpenGov to implement a new financial software solution. As part of this initiative, the city also contracted with UKG to deploy its UKG Ready platform, intended to serve as the city's payroll and human resource information system. During the course of implementation, it became apparent that the UKG Ready platform was not capable of accommodating the city's complex payroll requirements, particularly those associated with police and fire personnel. These limitations would necessitate extensive manual calculations by payroll staff, significantly increasing workload and elevating the risk of processing errors. In response, the city explored alternative solutions. That UKG subsequently recommended its more advanced platform, UKG Pro, which offers the necessary functionality to effectively manage the city's intricate payroll structure. Following several months of negotiations, UKG was submitted a proposal for the transition to UKG Pro at a cost of approximately $81,900 annually for a 3-year term, along with the one-time implementation fee of $55,822. This would replace the current UKG Ready contract, which is valued at about $63,000 annually. Although this proposal solution represents a cost increase, the UKG Pro platform offers significantly enhanced capabilities and are well aligned with the city's operational needs and will reduce the administrative burden on payroll staff. This upgrade is a necessary and strategic investment in modernizing the city's administrative functions and ensuring accurate and efficient payroll operations. This is a replacement of our current Eden payroll software, which is being discontinued in the upcoming years. In legal, we do have one thing that that Kevin's still working on, ironing out an issue with the terms of the contract and the contract related to cybersecurity. So I am going to make a recommendation that city staff is requesting council to authorize the mayor to enter into an agreement with UKG for the implementation of the UKG Pro payroll and human resource information system software after our city attorney agrees to the terms related to cybersecurity.
All right. Thank you, Doug. And thank you for briefing council in depth on this earlier this evening. Council, do you have any questions for Doug on this one? And do you understand a motion that we're asking for would be for approval of the agreement with once Kevin Rogerson adds to the agreement and makes that one.
So you want the motion after Kevin?
The motion now would be great, approving Kevin's addition later on for the future.
Motion to authorize the mayor, subject to review by the city attorney.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Richard and a second by Andrew. Hasn't had one tonight. Any more discussion on this one? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion passes. Thank you, Doug, but don't leave. Item F is an ordinance for a salary schedule amendment. Doug?
Thank you, Mayor. Staff recommends that council approve ordinance 3912, amending the 2025 salary schedules. So the current employee responsible for the property, room, and management of evidence is presently classified as a record specialist in the police department. She is scheduled to retire on June 28th, 2025. Following a comprehensive review of the position's duties and responsibilities, the police department has determined that it would be in the best interest of both the department and the city to reclassify this position to evidence technician. The recommendation reflects the operational reality that the role is dedicated full-time to the property room and is not assigned to the records section. In collaboration with the Human Resource Department, the Police Department has revised the job description to more accurately reflect the specialized nature of the duties performed and has identified an appropriate salary range placement within the city's classification structure. It is recommended that the position be classified from record specialist, currently placed at a range 20P on the non-commissioned police salary schedule, to evidence technician with a placement range of 21P on the same schedule. While the new classification carries a higher salary range, the current employee is at the top step, step 8, and the incoming employee is expected to be hired at a lower step, depending on qualifications and experience. As a result, the department anticipates an overall salary savings. The second one is the Human Resource Department recommends a reclassification of an existing accounting specialist position within the Finance Department following a thorough review of the incumbent's evolving duties and responsibilities. Reclassification is a process of updating a position's description to accurately represent the nature and scope of work currently being performed. Over the course of several years, the incumbent has assumed additional responsibilities and demonstrated a higher level of accountability, which now exceeds the scope of the original classification. Based on the assessment, Human Resource recommends that the position be retitled to Senior Accounting Specialist and reallocated to range 25 of the non-represented salary schedule. While this while this adjustment will result in a modest salary increase, the Finance Department anticipates a net savings. These savings are expected to result from the forthcoming retirement of our current payroll specialist in August, which will allow the department to fill the position at a lower step on the salary schedule. The staff recommends council approve ordinance 3912, amending the 2025 salary schedule.
Doug briefed council on this one earlier this evening as well. Council, do you have questions on this one? Anything come up?
I'd move to approve ordinance 3912.
Second.
Motion by Gary and a second by Gittes. Is there any discussion on it? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion passes. Council, item G was added to your agenda through an amendment in item 2 when you approved the agenda tonight. It's an interim ordinance and it will be presented by City Attorney Kevin Rogerson. Kevin.
Thank you, Mayor Donovan, and distinguished members of the city council. Before you would be ordinance assigned number 3913. This is an ordinance drafted by the Office of the City Attorney. It's not an agenda item until tonight because it is an emergency ordinance, which is allowed under state law, both in Title 35A, which delegates and grants you authority as a code city to do this, and also under the Growth Management Act. The ordinance relates to battery energy storage systems used to provide power to electrical grids. What is this ordinance? Well, what it is, it's a use of your police powers that are granted to you under those statutes to adopt land use regulations, official controls, and moratoria to preserve the status quo while you consider plans to deal with issues that you haven't previously been able to look at or be faced with. Particularly, this one deals with the increasing demand for energy or electricity as an energy source has resulted in the emergence of what is known as battery energy storage systems.
These are uses that are not identified in your zoning code. They're simply not there. They're not a permitted use, they're not a conditional use, they're not a prohibited use. So this moratorium, what would it do is would give you a timeout so you can do your due diligence, look at what impacts such sightings would have in your local jurisdiction, and be able to intelligently, knowingly, transparently, and through public process, determine as policymakers where you should cite such uses. This sets forth recitals that include that these storage systems commonly use lithium-ion technology. They're done in a large scale. They could present risks, fire hazards, thermal runaway events. If they're sited in wrong places, it could have impacts to neighborhoods' aesthetics, noise, and it makes factual findings. We don't have siting criteria for such uses. Procedurally, how this works is you adopt the interim ordinance tonight to avoid the risk of vesting an application. And then you'll have your hearing within 60 days through notice. You'll hear from the community. You will have an opportunity there to renew, repeal, or amend. And this ordinance would be good for 6 months or a year if you adopt a work plan. And at any time, if you as a legislative body wish to repeal it, you're certainly entitled to do so. But what this does is it's not saying we're not interested, it's time out. We're not ready. We need time to look at where these things should be. What this will do is provide you that time needed to review the information that affects the siting of such energy storage systems intended to supply power to the electrical grid and to review your municipal code in a comprehensive fashion to determine whether it sufficiently addresses the impacts of such uses, and if not, to adopt appropriate permanent regulation. So what this does is hereby adopts a moratorium on accepting applications for permits to construct, site, or develop such battery energy storage systems intended or likely to be used to primarily store and supply electrical power to the electrical grid within the city. We'll have a hearing within 60 days. This would require a majority of the whole plus one to pass because it's an emergency ordinance.
Thank you, Kevin. Before I open this up for questions, I just wanted to ask the city clerk what the ordinance number would be for this one. 3913. Thank you. Council, any questions for Kevin? Any thoughts, comments?
I would just, if I may.
Councilmember Vanderstoep.
If anybody has any questions, this is a subject I'm really familiar with. I will not be supporting the ordinance, unfortunately. But if you guys have any questions about where these are normally located, what purpose they serve or anything like that, more than happy to talk about it right now.
Any discussion, Council?
I guess I believe that it's fair for us to take a timeout and to really study it and understand what is the best use, placement, et cetera. So I don't have a problem at, putting an emergency ordinance in place, just so that we can study and be educated.
Councilmember, was that a motion?
I would make a motion to approve ordinance 3913.
Thanks.
I'd like to hear Councilman Vanderstoep's, what is your actual rationale to not supporting it?
Well, the ordinance identifies a couple really interesting things, but it doesn't actually address some of the issues that I would find to be the most important. If Doug Valesky has a chance, he can walk us through property tax values and how large energy development impacts property taxes in the city, which is actually probably the most pertinent issue that we should be talking about. And I think that some of the fear around where these are sited and around fire risk are mostly unfounded in most cases. So I think that there are certainly things to discuss, but we can talk to our fire and see if they are good with it or not. But I know that Skagit County Fire is good with these systems because I asked them personally. I've been to many hearings with them. And where these are sited is normally right next to a substation, because how they operate is they have to be close to one. And I'm guessing that most people here don't or can't come up with where they see a substation, like on their day to day, because you don't really notice them, which is the purpose. And so probably won't be visible. Fire risk is not really there. But there's a property tax issue that is worth talking about, but it's not addressed here. And I wouldn't feel comfortable supporting an ordinance that doesn't say, hey, we need to have Doug Valesky look at the property tax issue, or have, oh shoot, what's our Skagit County assessor's name? Denny Hagan, who is really intimate with this issue, come and speak to us about it. But that's not here, so. Sorry, that was a lot, but any other follow-ups? Seriously, more than happy to talk about this. I've talked about these things for years now.
Kevin, would a timeout in zoning and citing these allow us time to hear from some of the subject matter experts that Councilmember Vanderstoep mentioned?
That's the very purpose of an interim moratorium, is to discuss all the policy implications of this particular use in your community.
The only follow-up I'll bring up is that moratoriums are typically, in my world at least, a good showing of don't come here, don't develop here. So whenever a municipality of any sort puts in a moratorium, developers say, oh, this isn't the right place. So I would just be very careful about enacting moratoriums in general.
I will second Mary's motion. My concern is that our code does not address anything at the moment, and I do want to learn more, but I do know around this topic there is, whether warranted or not, there is very significant public fear and anxiety. And so I just think it's a good idea so that we can hear from everyone and the experts and our community. And so for those reasons, I'm seconding Mary's motion.
So we have a motion by Mary and a second by Melissa to approve ordinance number 3913. Is there any further discussion or questions?
And this would be for how long?
You'll have a hearing within 60 days to ratify it, renew it. It could be up to 6 months. In that 6 months, you can repeal it as a legislative body. You can replace it with an interim regulation. This is legislative.
And, is there, see, I don't know if we can talk about, are there permits being filed to do it? Or is this, so I would like it to be a little, I don't want it to drag on for 6 months. I would like to get some information, move on, and then.
So the purpose of this is you're in a state that is a application vesting state. Used to be the minority of states. I haven't checked it in a while, which means if somebody submits an application to build these systems today, they vest as a matter of law to apply your development regulations, which do not contemplate this use, and we have to make an interpretive decision, and that can be appealed as to whether or not that's correct, and you may get citing which you haven't contemplated. So this avoids that risk to say this is where we want to see these.
Run that by me, the last part.
It avoids the risk of being forced to make an interpretation of a code that doesn't identify these uses in an area that you might think is similarly intense, but you may not want as a legislative body, or you may want it. So it avoids that risk, so you can make a contemplated determination. And the speed as to that is the legislative will.
But Kevin, if we don't pause to decide to listen to the public, to study this a little bit more, to decide where the city would like to cite these, they can't, you're saying that they can be cited anywhere if an application is submitted.
There is uncertainty in your code as where it would end up being. Certainly, we could say that.
As currently proposed, what's the time frame that we're placing on this? Is it 60 days?
You'll have a hearing within 60 days as to whether or not to continue this moratorium, to repeal it, to amend it. It could be up to 6 months by statute. It could be up to a year if you adopt a work plan as to a permanent regulation. You also have the ability within that 6 months, whether or not to repeal it, you can add an interim regulation saying, here's where we want to see it as an interim basis.
But as proposed, it's 60 days and then we have to make another decision.
60-day hearing, yes.
Good question.
Within 60, it could be shorter.
Yeah. Richard?
Yeah, I think Skagit County is in need of a lot of work on energy strategy, and I'm looking forward to that discussion. I think the moratorium just buys us a little bit of time on our own city's regulations on the facts, so I'm ready to support the motion.
Are you there? All in favor of the motion to approve ordinance 3913, putting a moratorium, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no.
No.
Motion passes. Thank you, Kevin, for walking us through that. For item 7, since our city attorney is at the microphone and ready to speak, and he's been probably thinking about this all day, I will ask him if there is a need for city council and the mayor to go into executive session right now.
No.
And with that, we will adjourn the City of Mount Vernon City Council meeting for Wednesday, May 28th, 2025 at 8:04 p.m.